I flinched as my fiancé, as father slammed his crystal tumbler onto the mahogany dining table, bourbon splashing over the rim. "Let's be clear," he growled, his eyes cold as winter steel. "You're nothing but worthless trash who lucked into my son's life. The Montgomery name means something in this city." Across the table, my fiancé James sat frozen, his silence more damning than his father's words could ever be. The chandelier light seemed to dim around us in the sprawling mansion dining room, the air suddenly thick and difficult to breathe. I gripped the edge of my chair, knuckles white against the velvet upholstery, as Eleanor Montgomery dabbed her lips with a monogrammed napkin before adding her poison to the conversation. "Darling, we've spent generations building this family's reputation. We simply can't have someone from, well, your background tainting what we've worked so hard to achieve." Her diamond earrings caught the light as she tilted her head in practiced sympathy. "Surely you understand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." I'm Sophia Chen, 28 years old, and until that evening I'd been proudly working as the head of digital marketing for a growing nonprofit that provided educational opportunities for underprivileged children. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful work that had shaped me since I'd clawed my way out of foster care and put myself through college. James and I had met at a charity fundraiser 18 months ago. He'd spilled wine on my only good dress, insisted on buying me a new one, and somehow we'd fallen into a whirlwind romance that felt like stepping into someone else's fairy tale. When he proposed 6 months later, I thought I'd finally found what I'd spent my whole life searching for, a family of my own. What I didn't realize was that his family had a very specific definition of who belonged at their table, and it wasn't me. "You have absolutely nothing to offer this family," Richard Montgomery continued, swirling what remained of his bourbon. "No connections, no breeding, certainly no money. What exactly do you think qualifies you to marry into one of Boston's oldest families?" I glanced at James, waiting for him to defend me, to say something, anything, that would show he disagreed with his father's assessment. The silence stretched between us like a widening chasm. His eyes, usually warm amber, wouldn't meet mine. "James?" My voice sounded smaller than I'd intended, a question mark where there should have been certainty. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. The blue silk one I'd given him for his birthday. "Dad, maybe we could discuss this more privately." Not, "Dad, you're wrong." Not, "Dad, I love her." Just a request to move this humiliation behind closed doors. Eleanor placed her manicured hand over her son's. "James has responsibilities to this family that you simply cannot understand, dear. The Montgomery Foundation, the hospital board, our standing in society. These things have been cultivated for generations." I sat straighter, finding my voice. "I understand responsibility perfectly well. I've been responsible for myself since I was 14. Richard scoffed. "Yes, and look where that's gotten you. A charity worker with no family name, no trust fund, nothing of substance to contribute." The words sliced through me, not because they were new, but because they echoed the doubts that had haunted me since James and I began dating. I'd always wondered what someone like him saw in someone like me. Now I was hearing the answer, filtered through his parents, disdain. I placed my napkin beside my barely touched salmon. "James, do you agree with them?" The grandfather clock in the corner ticked through 5 excruciating seconds before he spoke. "Sophie, you know I love you, but my family has certain expectations. Maybe we could postpone the engagement announcement until you've had time to adjust to our world." Something cold and clarifying washed over me. I slipped the 4-carat diamond from my finger and placed it beside my water glass. The ring caught the light, throwing prisms across the hand-painted china. "I don't need time to adjust to your world," I said, my voice steadier than my heart. "And it seems you don't have the courage to stand in mine." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Don't be dramatic. James, tell her she's being unreasonable." But as I stood to leave, James didn't move, didn't speak, didn't choose. Richard smirked. "See? He knows we're right. The engagement was a mistake." I gathered my coat and purse, dignity the only possession I had that felt truly mine in that moment. The mistake was thinking that wealth meant worth. As I walked toward the door, Eleanor called after me. "You'll regret walking away from this opportunity. Do you have any idea what you're giving up? I paused at the threshold, turning back one last time. I know exactly what I'm giving up. The question is, do you know what you're losing? The heavy oak door closed behind me with a quiet finality as I stepped into the crisp autumn night. No dramatic slam, no shouting. Just the soft click of a chapter ending. I made it halfway down the curved driveway before the tears came, hot and fast against the October chill. My apartment was 20 miles away, my car parked in the Montgomery's circular drive, my heart shattered in their dining room. I pulled out my phone to call a rideshare, only to see it lighting up with texts from James. Come back inside. We can work this out. They'll come around eventually. The last one made me pause. Not, I'm sorry. Not, they're wrong. But they'll come around eventually. As if their approval was the problem, not their cruelty. Not his silence. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand and ordered the ride. As I waited by the wrought iron gates, I could see James framed in the bay window, phone in hand, watching me but not coming after me. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, took one look at my tear-streaked face and turned up the heater. Rough night, honey? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Want to talk about it, or want me to pretend I don't see those tears? I just found out I've been trying to belong somewhere I was never welcome. I managed. She met my eyes in the rearview mirror. Then maybe it's time to build a place where you do belong. Those simple words from a stranger hit me with unexpected force. I'd spent my entire life trying to prove I was worthy of belonging. In foster homes that never quite became family, in schools where I was always the scholarship kid, and now with James and his world of old money and older prejudices. When had I ever built something of my own? Back in my small apartment, I curled up on my sofa, the events of the evening playing on repeat in my mind. The worst part wasn't Richard's open contempt or Eleanor's condescending pity, it was James's silence. The way he'd sat there, caught between worlds, unwilling to build a bridge from either side. My phone continued buzzing with his messages, each one weaker than the last. Can we talk tomorrow when things are calmer? My parents are just protective. Please understand, this is complicated for me. Around midnight, I finally replied with just 4 words. It's actually very simple. Then I turned off my phone, took a long shower, and tried to wash away the evening along with my tears. As the hot water ran over me, I remembered something my third foster mother had told me years ago. The world will try to make you small, Sophia. Don't help it. I'd been helping the Montgomerys make me small, accepting their framing of who I was and wasn't. Allowing James's weak defense to seem better than nothing, because I'd grown accustomed to expecting nothing. By morning, I had 17 missed calls and 32 texts. Most from James, 3 from Eleanor, none from Richard. I scrolled through them without reading, then made myself a cup of strong coffee and opened my laptop. The first email I wrote was to James, short and clear. I deserve someone who chooses me openly, proudly, and immediately. Not eventually, not when it's convenient, not when I've proven myself worthy to people who will never see my worth. I wish you well, but this is goodbye. The second was to my boss at the nonprofit, requesting a week of emergency personal leave. The third was to a real estate agent about listing my apartment. If I was going to build something new, I needed to start from scratch. Within hours, James was at my door, looking rumpled and desperate in a way I'd never seen him. His usual polished appearance was replaced by stubble and pleading eyes. Sophie, please. I messed up. I should have defended you. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Yes, you should have. I will next time, I swear. I'll tell them they have to accept you, or they'll lose me too. There was a time when those words would have been everything I wanted to hear. Now they just sounded hollow, a promise made after the damage was done. There won't be a next time, James. You showed me who you are last night. You showed me exactly where I stand with you. He ran his hands through his hair, disheveling it further. That's not fair. You know how much pressure my family puts on me. The foundation, the family business, the expectations. I was caught off guard. Quote, "Life is full of moments that catch us off guard," I said quietly. "Those are the moments that show who we really are." His face hardened slightly. "So that's it? One mistake and you're throwing away everything we built?" "We didn't build anything, James. You collected me, like another achievement to display. And when it got difficult, you let me stand alone." "That's not true. I love you." "Love without courage isn't enough." He stepped closer, desperation etched across his features. "What do you want me to do? Cut off my family? Give up my inheritance? My position at the company? Everything I've worked for?" The question hung between us, revealing more than he intended. In his mind, choosing me fully meant losing everything else. I was an either-or proposition, not in addition to his life. "I never asked for any of that," I said softly. "I just wanted you to be proud to choose me." When he left an hour later, the engagement was officially over. I spent the day in a strange limbo, devastated but also strangely liberated. By evening, news of our broken engagement had spread through James's social circle. My phone lit up with messages from mutual friends, most expressing confusion, or offering well-meaning but hollow comfort. What none of them knew, what I myself was only beginning to understand, was that this ending was just the beginning of something else entirely. The next morning, I went to work as usual, diving into my marketing campaigns with new intensity. My colleague Mia noticed immediately. "You okay? You seem different." I paused, considering. "I ended my engagement last night." Her eyes widened. "To Montgomery? The James Montgomery? Why? What happened?" I could have told her about the dinner, about Richard's contempt and Eleanor's condescension. I could have made myself the victim in the story. Instead, I simply said, we wanted different futures. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What I didn't tell Mia was what I'd realized in the middle of the night. The Montgomerys had shown me exactly what they thought of me, but in doing so, they'd inadvertently given me something valuable: clarity. For years, I'd been apologizing for my existence. Foster kid, scholarship student, nonprofit worker. I'd been trying to prove I was worthy of taking up space in rooms like the Montgomerys' dining room, when I should have been building my own tables. That afternoon, my boss called me into her office. Angela Lee had built our nonprofit from nothing into one of Boston's most respected educational organizations. She was a fierce advocate for our mission and had been my mentor since I joined the team 3 years ago. "I heard about you and James," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "Are you doing okay?" "Getting there," I admitted. She studied me for a moment. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something, but I was waiting for the right time. Maybe that's now." She slid a folder across her desk. Inside was a proposal for a new digital initiative, one that would expand our online educational programs nationally, potentially reaching thousands more children. "I want you to lead this," she said. "It means more responsibility, more visibility, and yes, more money. But mostly, I think it's exactly what you need right now, a project that matters." As I flipped through the pages, I felt something spark inside me: purpose, possibility, potential. "Why me?" Angela leaned forward. "Because you understand both sides of our work. You were one of the kids we aimed to help, and now you're one of the leaders helping others. That perspective is invaluable. For the first time since that awful dinner, I felt something like hope stirring. When do we start?" "Yesterday," she smiled. "But first, I need you at the Preston Foundation Gala next week. They're considering a major grant for this initiative, and I want you to present our vision." My stomach dropped. The Preston Foundation was deeply connected to Boston's elite circle. Exactly the world the Montgomerys inhabited. Will the Montgomerys be there? Angela's expression softened with understanding. "Probably. Richard's on their board. But Sophia, this isn't about them. It's about the work. Our work." She was right, of course. I couldn't avoid half of Boston's philanthropic community because of one family. And more importantly, I couldn't let them define which spaces I was allowed to occupy. "I'll be there," I promised. Over the next week, I threw myself into preparing for both the presentation and the inevitable encounter with the Montgomerys. I bought a new dress, nothing flashy, but beautifully tailored and confidently elegant. I practiced my speaking points until I could deliver them in my sleep. I rehearsed polite but distant responses to any potential interaction with James or his parents. What I couldn't prepare for was what actually happened. The night of the gala arrived. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts transformed into a glittering showcase of wealth and influence. I arrived alone, armed with my presentation notes and a determination to focus solely on the work. I spotted the Montgomerys almost immediately. Richard holding court near the bar, Eleanor graciously accepting compliments on her charity work, James looking uncomfortable in a group of family friends. For a moment, our eyes met across the room. He started to move toward me, but I turned away, approaching a group of education advocates I recognized. The first hour passed in a blur of networking and careful navigation to avoid direct contact with my ex-fiancé or his family. Then came the presentation portion of the evening. Angela introduced me with pride, and I took my place at the podium. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in my stomach. "I'm Sophia Chen, Digital Marketing Director for BrightPath Educational Initiative. Tonight, I want to share our vision for expanding access to quality education for children nationwide, regardless of their zip code or family circumstances." As I spoke about our digital platform, about the children whose lives had already been changed, about the thousands more waiting for the same opportunity, I felt something shifting in the room. People were listening, really listening. Not to James Montgomery's ex-fiancé, but to me, to my passion, my expertise, my vision. "This initiative isn't just about education," I continued. "It's about possibility. Every child deserves to know that their circumstances don't define their potential. That where they come from doesn't determine where they can go." My eyes found Richard Montgomery in the crowd, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I allowed myself to look directly at him as I said, "Some of you may not know that I was once one of these children. Foster care, scholarship student, constantly trying to prove I belonged in rooms exactly like this one." A murmur rippled through the audience. What I've learned is that belonging isn't about proving yourself worthy of a place at someone else's table. It's about building tables where everyone's value is recognized from the start. The applause when I finished was thunderous. People approached me afterward, business cards extended, questions flowing, connections forming. Angela beamed proudly from across the room. And in that moment, standing in the very world that had rejected me, I realized I'd never felt more powerful. As the crowd around me thinned, Eleanor Montgomery appeared at my elbow, her smile tight but determined. "That was quite a speech, Sophia." "Thank you, Mrs. Montgomery. I think perhaps we got off on the wrong foot at dinner last month. James has been absolutely miserable without you." I met her gaze evenly. "I'm sorry to hear that." She glanced around to ensure no one was listening too closely. "The Preston Foundation is very likely to fund your initiative after tonight. Richard sits on the board, you know. Perhaps we could discuss reconciliation over lunch sometime? James would be so pleased." And there it was. The real reason for this sudden warmth, not because they'd recognized my worth, but because others had. Not because they regretted their cruelty, but because it might now come with consequences in their social circles. "Mrs. Montgomery," I said quietly, "I appreciate the invitation, but I'm afraid I'll have to decline. My focus right now is entirely on this project." Her smile faltered. "Don't be hasty, dear. The Montgomery name could open many doors for your little charity work." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Actually, it seems my work is opening its own doors just fine. Before she could respond, Angela called me over to meet the Preston Foundation's executive director. As I excused myself from Eleanor, I caught sight of James watching us, his expression a complex mixture of longing and regret. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel the weight of what might have been the life we'd planned, the future we'd imagined. Then I turned away and walked toward my actual future, one I was building on my own terms. By the end of the night, the Preston Foundation had all but committed to funding our initiative. As I gathered my things to leave, James finally approached, keeping a respectful distance. "You were amazing tonight," he said softly. "I've never seen that side of you before." "It was always there," I replied. "You just never really looked." The Preston Foundation's grant came through 2 weeks later, the largest single donation our nonprofit had ever received. My inbox filled with congratulatory messages, including one from Angela announcing my promotion to Director of Digital Innovation. The organization was gaining recognition, our educational platform was expanding rapidly, and my career was soaring. Amidst the professional triumph, I still found myself ducking into shop doorways whenever I spotted James across the street, or rerouting my morning coffee run to avoid Eleanor's favorite breakfast spot. Boston suddenly felt too small, the social circles too interconnected. Every charity event, gallery opening, and community function carried the risk of another Montgomery encounter. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was achieving exactly what Richard Montgomery claimed I couldn't, yet I was still letting his family dictate my movements in subtle ways. They had become ghosts haunting the periphery of my success. That changed on a rainy Tuesday morning when my assistant, Zoe, placed a heavy cream envelope on my desk. "Special delivery," she said with a curious look, "hand-delivered by messenger." The Montgomery family crest was embossed in gold on the envelope flap. Inside was an invitation to the annual Montgomery Foundation Gala, one of Boston's most prestigious social events. The handwritten note at the bottom read simply, "Your presence is specifically requested. Richard Montgomery." I stared at the invitation, turning it over in my hands as if searching for the trap. The Montgomerys never did anything without calculation. This wasn't reconciliation, it was strategy. "Bad news?" Zoe asked, lingering in my doorway. I slipped the invitation back into its envelope. "Not bad. Just complicated." That evening, I called the one person who'd understand the complexity of the situation, my former foster brother, Marcus. He'd aged out of the system 2 years before me but had kept in touch, eventually becoming a corporate lawyer in New York. He was the closest thing to family I had. "They're testing you," Marcus said after I explained the situation. "They've realized you're not going away, so now they're trying to control the narrative." "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Soph. If you don't show up, they can tell everyone you're bitter about James. If you do show up and seem uncomfortable, they can paint you as the awkward ex who can't move on. Either way, they maintain control." I sank deeper into my couch, running my fingers along the edge of the invitation. "So what do I do?" "You show up looking amazing, you network like hell with everyone who might support your nonprofit, and you act like the Montgomerys are just another family in the room. Take away their power to define who you are in that space." The wisdom in his advice resonated, but something else was bothering me. "It's not just about the gala, Marcus. It's bigger than that. Every time I achieve something now, there's this voice in my head wondering if I'm doing it to prove them wrong." "And is that such a bad thing?" he asked. Some of the greatest success stories started with someone saying, "Watch me," to the people who underestimated them. After we hung up, I sat with the invitation for a long time, tracing the embossed lettering with my fingertip. The Montgomerys had called me worthless trash in the privacy of their dining room. Now they were inviting me into their most public space. Something had changed, and I needed to understand what. The next morning, I asked Angela about the invitation. Her eyes widened slightly. "Interesting. The Preston Foundation must have made more of an impression than we thought." "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Word around the philanthropic circuit is that the Prestons were very impressed with you personally. Their board is looking to diversify its membership with younger voices who have first-hand experience in the communities they serve." The pieces clicked into place, and Richard Montgomery sits on that board. "One of its most influential members," Angela confirmed. "If you were to join, you'd be working closely with him." My guess is he's trying to smooth things over before that becomes a reality. The revelation sent my mind racing. This wasn't about James or reconciliation. This was about Richard protecting his influence at the Preston Foundation. My potential appointment would force him to interact with me as a peer, not as his son's inappropriate choice of partner. "So what's your advice?" I asked Angela. She studied me for a moment. "Go to the gala. Be gracious but firm. Show them and everyone else that you belong in that room on your own merit." Over the next 2 weeks, I prepared for the gala with the same intensity I'd approached the Preston Foundation presentation. I found a dress that struck the perfect balance between elegance and confidence, a midnight blue column with a subtle shimmer that caught the light when I moved. I practiced responses to potential questions or provocations. I researched every board member and donor who might be in attendance. This wasn't just about facing the Montgomerys. It was about establishing myself as a force in Boston's philanthropic community on my own terms. The night of the gala, I arrived precisely 15 minutes after the stated start time, late enough to ensure most guests would be present, early enough to be respectful. The Montgomery estate was transformed, the sprawling gardens lit with thousands of fairy lights, the marble foyer filled with Boston's elite in evening wear. I handed my invitation to the doorman, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The first person I saw was James, standing with a group of friends near the bar. He froze mid-sentence when he spotted me, his expression cycling rapidly through surprise, hope, and uncertainty. I gave him a small, polite nod, the kind you'd give a casual acquaintance, and moved past him toward the main ballroom. Eleanor intercepted me before I'd gone 10 steps. "Sophia, you came," she said, air kissing near my cheek. "How lovely to see you. That dress is quite bold." "Thank you for the invitation, Mrs. Montgomery," I replied evenly. "The Foundation's work is important. I wouldn't miss it." Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, well, Richard specifically mentioned you should be included this year. He's by the string quartet if you'd like to say hello." I wondered if she realized what she'd just revealed, that in previous years I would not have been included despite being engaged to their son. Some lessons are learned too late. "I'll be sure to thank him," I said, then added with deliberate casualness, "I hear the Preston Foundation Board is considering some exciting new appointments." Eleanor's practiced smile faltered. "Yes, I believe they are. Richard has been quite involved in the discussions." Before she could say more, I excused myself to greet Angela, who had just arrived with her husband. As I moved through the crowd, I could feel eyes following me. Curious glances, whispered conversations. The ex-fiancé had returned to the scene, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. I spent the next hour networking strategically, connecting with potential donors for our digital initiative, exchanging business cards with education advocates, and carefully avoiding both James and his father. If this was a chess game, I was positioning my pieces before the critical confrontation. When dinner was announced, I found my assigned seat at a table far from the Montgomery family, but prominently placed near several Preston Foundation board members. Someone had given careful thought to my placement, visible but separate. The woman beside me, an elegant, silver-haired philanthropist named Vivian Preston, introduced herself as we sat down. "You're Sophia Chen, aren't you? The one who presented that remarkable educational initiative last month." "Yes, that's me," I smiled, pleasantly surprised to be recognized by someone of her stature. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Preston. Please, call me Vivian. Your presentation made quite an impression on my husband and me. We rarely see such passion combined with such practical vision." As we chatted about the digital platform and its potential impact, I realized she wasn't just making polite conversation. She was evaluating me. By the time the main course arrived, she'd invited me to present at her Women's Leadership Summit in the spring. "We need more voices like yours," she said, patting my hand. "Voices that understand both worlds." Across the ballroom, I caught Richard Montgomery watching our interaction, his expression unreadable. When our eyes met, he inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement before turning back to his dinner companions. After dessert, the formal program began. Richard took the stage to welcome everyone and outline the Montgomery Foundation's achievements over the past year. His voice carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Tonight is about recognizing those who understand the responsibility that comes with privilege," he said, surveying the room. "Those who use their position to elevate others." I almost laughed at the irony. 2 months ago, in his dining room, he'd made it abundantly clear that I didn't belong in his world precisely because I lacked position. Now he was speaking about elevation while I sat at Vivian Preston's table, potentially on the verge of joining a board he considered his territory. As the speeches continued, James made his way to my table during a brief intermission, approaching with visible nervousness. "You look beautiful tonight," he said quietly. "I've missed you." "Thank you," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "The foundation is doing impressive work this year." He glanced around before leaning closer. "Can we talk somewhere private, just for a few minutes?" Part of me wanted to refuse, to deny him the closure he was seeking, but another part needed closure too, not to rekindle what we had, but to fully release it. 5 minutes, I agreed, following him to a small library off the main hall. Once the door closed behind us, James turned to me with an expression I'd seen many times before: boyish contrition, mixed with an expectation of forgiveness. It had always worked on me in the past. "I've been trying to call you," he began. "I know. My parents were wrong about you. What they said was unforgivable." I studied him, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. "But you didn't think it was unforgivable that night. You sat there and let it happen." He ran his hand through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration. I was caught off guard. "You have to understand, I've never gone against them before." "That's exactly the problem, James. You still see standing up for me, for us, as going against them. It should have been standing up for what's right." "I know that now," he insisted. "I've had time to think, to realize what I lost. I've told them I won't accept how they treated you. I want another chance." I felt a strange calm settle over me. 2 months ago, these words would have been everything I wanted to hear. Now they felt like echoes from a different life. "James, do you want to know what I realized after that dinner? It wasn't just your parents who couldn't see my worth. You couldn't either. Not really. You saw me as someone to be protected and polished, not as someone equal to you." "That's not true," he protested. "I loved you. I still love you. You loved the idea of me, the inspiring story of the foster kid who overcame the odds. But when that story became inconvenient, when it required you to actually take a stand, you faltered." His expression hardened slightly. "Is this about the Preston Foundation Board? Is that why you're here tonight?" The question revealed more than he intended. "Is that what your father thinks? That I'm leveraging our history for a board seat?" He mentioned the possibility, James admitted. "He's concerned about the optics." I almost laughed. "The optics, of course." I moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I didn't know about any board seat when I received your father's invitation. I came here tonight to prove something to myself, not to him, and certainly not to you." Back in the ballroom, the formal presentations had concluded, and guests were mingling freely. I spotted Richard Montgomery in conversation with 2 older men I recognized as Preston Foundation executives. His eyes tracked me as I emerged from the library, followed moments later by James. I made my way to Angela, who raised an eyebrow in silent question. "Just tying up loose ends," I assured her. "Well, while you were doing that, Vivian Preston told me she wants you to join their Women in Leadership Committee," Angela said. "Apparently you made quite an impression." Before I could respond, a waiter appeared with a folded note. "Ms. Chen? Mr. Montgomery requests a moment of your time on the terrace." The invitation was unexpected, but not surprising. This confrontation had been inevitable from the moment I received the gala invitation. I thanked the waiter and made my way through the French doors to the expansive stone terrace overlooking the Montgomery Gardens. Richard stood alone at the balustrade, his back to the party, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't turn as I approached, but I knew he was aware of my presence. "Ms. Chen," he acknowledged finally. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Montgomery," I replied. "Thank you for the invitation." He turned then, his expression inscrutable in the dim terrace lighting. "I imagine you're wondering why I invited you tonight." "I have my theories." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm sure you do. You've proven to be more resourceful than I anticipated." "Resourceful? Is that what we're calling it now?" He took a measured sip of his drink. "I've been on the Preston Foundation board for 15 years. It's important work. Work that requires certain relationships, certain understandings between the parties involved." I met his gaze steadily. "Are you asking me to decline if they offer me a position?" "I'm suggesting that your presence would create an unnecessary complication. For all parties." "Because I'm worthless trash?" I quoted his words back to him calmly. To his credit, he didn't flinch. "That was regrettable," said in the heat of a private family discussion. "It wasn't regrettable because it was wrong," I observed. "It was regrettable because it might now have public consequences." Richard studied me for a long moment. "You know, in business, I've always respected opponents who understand the real game being played, so let me be direct. What do you want?" The question caught me off guard. "Excuse me?" "To resolve this situation, what do you want? A donation to your nonprofit? A position elsewhere? Name your price." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. He genuinely believed this was a negotiation, that my dignity and self-worth were commodities to be bartered. "Mr. Montgomery," I said finally, "I don't want anything from you. I'm not here to leverage our history or to cause complications. If the Preston Foundation offers me a position, I'll make my decision based on where I can do the most good for the children we serve." He scoffed lightly. "Everyone wants something." "That's where you're wrong. Not everyone sees the world as a series of transactions. Some of us see it as a place where people have inherent value, regardless of their bank accounts or family names." "A lovely sentiment," he said dismissively. "But naive." I turned to go, then paused. "You know what's truly naive, Mr. Montgomery? Believing that your wealth makes you untouchable. That you can say and do whatever you want without consequences, because your name is on a few buildings." His expression darkened. "Is that a threat?" "Number. It's an observation from someone you underestimated. Good night, Mr. Montgomery." I returned to the ballroom with my head high, feeling strangely liberated. For weeks, I'd been carrying the weight of their judgment, allowing their assessment to shape my movements in subtle ways. But in that conversation on the terrace, I'd finally set down that burden. As I collected my rep from the coat check, Vivian Preston appeared beside me. "Leaving so soon?" she asked. "I've had a full evening." I smiled. She nodded knowingly. "I saw you speaking with Richard on the terrace. He can be quite territorial about his board positions." My smile faltered. "You know about that?" "My dear, I'm married to the man who founded the Preston Foundation. Very little happens there that I don't know about." She patted my arm. "Richard called an emergency meeting yesterday to express his concerns about potential new board members." I felt my cheeks warm with embarrassment. "Mrs. Preston, I want to be clear that I never—" She held up a hand to stop me. "Sophia, do you know why our foundation focuses on educational access?" "Because my husband and I both came from nothing. The Preston fortune wasn't inherited. It was built from a small tech startup in the 1980s. Men like Richard Montgomery have never understood that." I stared at her, processing this revelation. "The board will be making its decision next week," she continued. "I hope you'll consider accepting if an offer is extended. We need more voices that understand the real impact of our work." As my car pulled away from the Montgomery estate, I watched the glittering mansion recede in the rearview mirror. For the first time since that fateful dinner, I felt completely free of its shadow. Whether or not I joined the Preston Foundation board, I had reclaimed my narrative from the Montgomerys: control. The following week passed in a blur of meetings and project deadlines. Our digital platform was gaining national attention, with school districts across the country reaching out about potential partnerships. I threw myself into the work, the Montgomery Gala fading into the background of my increasingly busy life. Then, on Friday afternoon, my assistant Zoe knocked on my office door. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Eleanor Montgomery." I set down my pen, surprised. Did she say what this is about? No, but she seems agitated. I took a deep breath. "Send her in." Eleanor entered my office with none of her usual poise. Her typically perfect appearance showed signs of strain. A slightly smudged lipstick line, hair not quite as neatly styled as usual. "Mrs. Montgomery." I greeted her, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "This is unexpected." She remained standing. "I'll get right to the point. Whatever Richard said to you at the gala, I need you to reconsider." "Reconsider what, exactly?" The Preston Foundation called this morning. They're announcing new board appointments on Monday. Richard hasn't been reappointed. They're giving his seat to someone else. Her voice wavered slightly. "To you." The news hit me like a physical force. I haven't received any call. They're calling this afternoon. Richard has been on that board for 15 years. It's one of our family's most important connections. You have to understand what this means to us. I leaned back in my chair, processing her words. "Mrs. Montgomery, I had nothing to do with Richard not being reappointed." "But you'll benefit from it," she insisted. "You'll take his place. If they offer me a position, it will be because they believe in my work, not because I orchestrated some vendetta against your family." Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "Do you have any idea what you've done? First, James. Now this. You're dismantling everything we've built." The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. "Mrs. Montgomery, with all due respect, I didn't do anything to your family. Your husband called me worthless trash at your dinner table. Your son sat silently while it happened. Those were your choices, not mine." "It was one bad night," she protested. "Everyone says things they don't mean in the heat of the moment. But that's just it. I think you did mean it. You meant every word until it became inconvenient to have said it out loud." She stared at me, her carefully constructed worldview visibly crumbling. "What do you want? Money? A public apology? Tell me what it will take to fix this." In that moment, I saw clearly what I couldn't see months ago. The Montgomerys' power was largely an illusion, maintained through fear and social pressure. Once you stepped outside its sphere, it lost its hold. "I don't want anything from you," I said quietly. "That's what you've never understood. I never wanted your money or your name or your approval. I just wanted respect, the basic dignity you'd give any human being." My phone rang, interrupting the tense silence. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Sophia, it's David Preston calling. He says it's important." Eleanor's eyes widened in panic. "Please," she whispered. "Richard will be destroyed if he loses this position." I held her gaze for a long moment, then pressed the intercom button. "Tell Mr. Preston, I'll call him back in 15 minutes. After Eleanor left, I sat alone in my office, considering the choice before me. The Preston Foundation board seat would be a powerful platform for advancing educational access. It would also place me in direct opposition to the Montgomery family in one of Boston's most influential circles. When I finally returned David Preston's call, I had made my decision not based on revenge or validation, but on where I could do the most good. And in doing so, I found the final piece of my own liberation from the shadow of the Montgomerys: judgment. The true power, I realized, wasn't in taking Richard's board seat or in watching their social standing diminish. It was in making choices based on my own values rather than in reaction to theirs. In building something meaningful rather than tearing something down. As I hung up the phone with David Preston, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The Montgomerys had called me worthless trash at their dinner table, but in the end, they'd be the ones left to reckon with the true value of what they had so carelessly discarded. The day after my conversation with David Preston, the Boston Business Journal published a small but significant announcement. Rising nonprofit leader Sophia Chen declines Preston Foundation board position. What the article didn't mention was my counteroffer, that instead of taking a seat myself, I had proposed establishing a new youth advisory board comprised entirely of graduates from underserved communities. Young people who've lived the challenges we're trying to solve should have a voice in how we address them. I'd explained to David Preston. I'd be honored to help establish and mentor this board, but I believe my primary impact should remain with direct program implementation. David had been surprised but intrigued. By the end of our call, he was enthusiastically supportive, already envisioning how this youth board could inform the foundation's grant-making strategies. The board seat originally offered to me would instead go to Marcus, my former foster brother, whose legal expertise and personal experience made him an ideal candidate. What the article also didn't mention was that Richard Montgomery's position had been eliminated entirely as part of a board restructuring. His removal wasn't personal. It was simply part of the foundation's new direction, focusing on diverse voices with direct experience in the communities they served. The morning the article was published, I received a text from James. "You turned down the board seat? Why?" I didn't respond immediately. There was no simple way to explain that accepting would have made my story about the Montgomerys rather than about the work. That true power comes from building something meaningful, not from taking something away from someone else. Instead, I focused on preparing for our digital platform's national launch. The Preston Foundation had committed substantial funding to expand our reach, and Angela had given me almost complete autonomy over the project. For the first time in my career, I was building something entirely my own, shaped by my vision and experiences. 3 days after the article appeared, a hand-delivered package arrived at my office. Inside was a small wooden box with the Montgomery family crest on the lid. My stomach tightened as I opened it, half expecting some final attempt at manipulation or intimidation. Instead, I found a folded note in unfamiliar handwriting, and beneath it, a heavy silver key. The note read, "Ms. Chen, it seems I misjudged you in more ways than one. The easy path would have been taking my board seat. The harder path was the one you chose. I respect that choice, even if I don't fully understand it. This key opens the Montgomery Foundation's historical archives. You'll find 70 years of educational grant data that might prove useful for your platform. Consider it a professional courtesy. Richard Montgomery." I stared at the key, turning it over in my hands. Not an apology, not quite a peace offering, but something more complex. An acknowledgement from a man who had built his life on hierarchy and tradition that perhaps there were other forms of power he hadn't recognized. The Montgomery Foundation archives became an unexpected resource for our work, providing historical context that helped us identify patterns in educational interventions over decades. Which programs had created lasting change? Which had looked promising but failed to sustain impact? The data was invaluable. Occasionally, I would encounter Richard in the archives, both of us maintaining a careful professional distance. We never discussed James or that infamous dinner, focusing instead on research questions and foundation history. It wasn't friendship or even reconciliation. It was a fragile professional détente, built on mutual respect for the work itself. 6 months after the gala, our digital platform officially launched nationwide. The press coverage was extensive, with education journals and major news outlets featuring our innovative approach to closing achievement gaps. My inbox filled with congratulatory messages from across the country, including a brief but warm note from Vivian Preston. The morning after the launch, Angela called me into her office. Her expression was serious as she closed the door behind me. "The board had an emergency meeting last night," she began. "The platform's success has exceeded all our projections. We're already receiving partnership requests from school districts in 37 states." "That's amazing," I said, confused by her somber tone. "It is. And it's created an unexpected challenge." She slid a folder across her desk. "These are acquisition offers from 3 major education technology companies. They want to buy our platform. All of them." I opened the folder, my eyes widening at the figures. "These are substantial," Angela finished for me. "Especially the offer from Montgomery Educational Technologies." My head snapped up. "Montgomery? a subsidiary of Montgomery Holdings, Richard's company. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had once called me worthless was now offering millions for something I had built. "What does the board want to do?" I asked carefully. Angela sighed. "They're divided. The Montgomery offer is significantly higher than the others. From a financial standpoint, it makes sense. From a mission standpoint..." She trailed off, leaving the implications hanging between us. If we sell, what happens to our control over implementation? To our commitment to serving the most vulnerable students first? That would depend on the terms we negotiate. But ultimately, we'd be giving up final decision-making authority. I closed the folder, my mind racing. "I need time to think about this." "Take the day," Angela said. "But the board wants our recommendation by tomorrow morning." I spent the afternoon walking through Boston Common, trying to sort through the complicated emotions the Montgomery offer had triggered. On one level, it represented validation, financial proof of the value of what I'd built. On another level, it felt like a hostile takeover, an attempt to purchase what couldn't be controlled through intimidation. As dusk fell, I found myself in front of the public garden gate where James had proposed 18 months earlier. I could still picture him kneeling on the cobblestones, ring box open, face full of hope and certainty. I had said yes immediately, never questioning whether his family would accept me, never imagining I would one day be negotiating with his father over the future of my life's work. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Heard about the offers. Call me." When I did, his lawyer's mind had already jumped several steps ahead. "You need to counter with an investment proposal instead of an acquisition," he said without preamble. "Keep majority control, take their money to scale faster, but maintain your decision-making authority." You think they'd go for that? Montgomery would. He doesn't just want the platform. He wants the Preston Foundation connection that comes with it. And he wants you. I nearly dropped my phone. "What are you talking about?" "Think about it, Soph. You turned down his board seat, established a youth board that's getting national attention, and built a platform that's revolutionizing educational access. You're not just the ex-fiancé anymore. You're a power player in your own right. Having you under the Montgomery corporate umbrella solves multiple problems for him." The realization settled over me like a physical weight. This isn't about education technology at all. "It's partly about that," Marcus conceded. "The platform is genuinely valuable. But it's also about optics and influence." Classic Richard Montgomery. By the time I returned to the office the next morning, I had developed a clear counter strategy. Instead of accepting or rejecting the acquisition offers outright, I proposed a hybrid approach, a significant investment round that would allow us to scale rapidly, while maintaining our independence and mission focus. "We invite all three companies to participate as minority investors," I explained to the board. "We set clear terms that protect our core commitments to underserved communities, and we establish an advisory council that includes representatives from the communities we serve." The board was cautiously supportive but concerned about execution. "Montgomery won't settle for a minority stake," one member argued. "He doesn't play well with others." "Let me handle the negotiations," I said with more confidence than I felt. "I think I understand what he's really after." The meeting with Richard Montgomery was set for the following Tuesday at his downtown office. I arrived 15 minutes early, using the time to center myself and review my talking points. This wasn't personal, I reminded myself. This was business. Richard's assistant ushered me into his corner office precisely on time. The space was exactly what I had expected. Dark wood, leather furniture, framed family photos showing generations of Montgomery success. Richard stood as I entered, extending his hand across an imposing mahogany desk. "Ms. Chen, thank you for coming. Mr. Montgomery, thank you for your interest in our platform." We settled into our respective positions, he behind his desk, me in the visitor's chair opposite him. The power dynamic was intentional but ineffective. I had faced too much to be intimidated by furniture arrangements. "I'll get straight to the point," he began. "Your counter-proposal is interesting but ultimately unworkable for us. Montgomery Educational Technologies doesn't make minority investments. We acquire and integrate." I had anticipated this opening gambit. "I understand that's your usual approach, but this situation is unique. Our platform's success depends on community trust and mission alignment. A corporate acquisition would undermine both." We would maintain the mission, he countered, with significantly more resources behind it. Under whose direction? A slight smile played at the corner of his mouth. You could stay on as division head, of course, with appropriate compensation and authority. And there it was, the real offer beneath the corporate language, a position within the Montgomery empire, a way to bring me into the fold on his terms. That's very generous, I said carefully. But I think we both know this isn't just about educational technology. It's about narrative. His expression remained neutral, but I caught the flicker of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't expected me to address the subtext directly. I'm not sure I follow. I think you do, I continued. Your acquisition offer isn't just about buying a platform. It's about bringing me under the Montgomery umbrella. About changing the story from Montgomery rejects Chen to Montgomery hires Chen. It's cleaner that way, isn't it? Easier to explain at charity galas. A long silence stretched between us. Then, surprisingly, Richard laughed. A short, genuine sound I had never heard from him before. You really aren't like anyone else in our circle, he said, shaking his head slightly. Most people would dance around it for hours. I'm not most people. And I'm not in your circle. No, you're not. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with new interest. So where does that leave us? You won't sell. I don't make minority investments. Seems we're at an impasse. I opened my portfolio and placed a document on his desk. Not necessarily. This is a different proposal altogether. A partnership rather than an investment or acquisition. He raised an eyebrow but picked up the document. I'm listening. Montgomery Educational Technologies has distribution channels and institutional relationships we lack. We have community trust and implementation expertise you need. Instead of trying to buy what can't be bought, we propose a strategic alliance. You distribute our platform through your channels. We maintain control over implementation and community relationships. We both profit. We both advance educational access. Richard read through the proposal slowly, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, there was something new in his eyes. A grudging respect. This is unexpected. Is that a yes or a no? He set the document down carefully. Let me discuss this with my team. This approach is unorthodox for us. Unorthodox can be powerful, I said, like a youth advisory board for a traditional foundation. Or a partnership between two parties with a complicated history. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Indeed. He stood, extending his hand again. I'll have an answer for you by Friday. As I rode the elevator down from Richard's office, I felt a curious sense of closure. Regardless of his decision on the partnership proposal, something fundamental had shifted. I had sat across from the man who had once deemed me worthless and negotiated as an equal. Not as James's fiancé or ex-fiancé, but as Sophia Chen, architect of something valuable enough that even Richard Montgomery wanted a piece of it. The partnership agreement was finalized 3 weeks later, after intense negotiation over terms and governance. The press release announcing the collaboration between Montgomery Educational Technologies and our nonprofit generated significant industry attention, with education journals highlighting the unusual nature of the partnership between a corporate giant and a community-focused organization. What the press release didn't mention was the private conversation Richard and I had after signing the final documents. You could have taken my board seat, he said as we stood in the conference room after everyone else had left. You could have rejected our acquisition offer without proposing an alternative. You chose a different path each time. I wasn't interested in proving you wrong, I replied. I was interested in building something right. He nodded slowly. James misses you, you know. He still talks about you. The mention of James caught me off guard. We hadn't spoken his name in any of our negotiations. That chapter is closed, I said simply. Because of what I said at dinner that night? I considered the question carefully, partly, but mostly because when it mattered, he didn't choose me. He didn't even see me. Not really. He saw the idea of me, the story of me, but not me. Richard looked out the window at the Boston skyline. For what it's worth, I was wrong about you. Not just professionally, personally. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Richard Montgomery, it was as close as anyone was likely to get. I accepted it for what it was. An acknowledgement, however belated, of my inherent worth. As summer turned to fall, our partnership with Montgomery Educational Technologies helped expand our platform to reach over 100,000 students across the country. The Youth Advisory Board at the Preston Foundation was garnering national attention as a model for inclusive philanthropic governance. My career was soaring in ways I had never imagined possible when I sat in the Montgomerys' dining room hearing myself described as worthless trash. In October, I received a wedding invitation. James was marrying a woman from another prominent Boston family, someone his parents had likely approved from the start. I sent a polite gift but declined to attend. Some doors are better left closed. The real surprise came the following week when Eleanor Montgomery requested a meeting at her favorite tea room. Curiosity more than anything else led me to accept. We hadn't spoken directly since her desperate visit to my office over the Preston Foundation board seat. She was already seated when I arrived, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. The tea room was elegant but understated. The kind of place where Boston's old money conducted discreet conversations away from public scrutiny. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I was curious," I admitted. She nodded, pouring tea from a silver pot with practiced grace. "I imagine you received James's wedding invitation." "I did. I've sent my regrets." "That's probably for the best." She handed me a delicate porcelain cup. "Camilla is suitable. Their children will have the right connections, the right background." The familiar language of hierarchy and breeding would have stung once. Now it just seemed sad and limiting. "Is that why you wanted to meet? To discuss James's wedding?" Eleanor set down her cup carefully. "No, I wanted to apologize." Of all the scenarios I had imagined for this meeting, an apology had never crossed my mind. I waited, saying nothing. "What Richard said that night at dinner was cruel," she continued, "and my silence was equally wrong. I was raised to believe that family position was everything, that maintaining our social standing was the highest priority. It's taken me a long time to recognize the harm in that thinking." "What changed?" I asked quietly. She smiled sadly. "You did. Or rather, watching what you've built since walking out of our dining room. The way you've conducted yourself with dignity and purpose. The partnerships you've created, including with Richard. It's made me question many things I once took as absolute truth." I sipped my tea, processing her words. "Thank you for saying that. It means something even now." "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, straightening her shoulders. "But I wanted you to know that you've changed at least one person's perspective. Mine." As we finished our tea, conversation turned to safer topics. The educational platform, the Youth Advisory Board, Boston's upcoming cultural season. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no promises of future friendship. Just two women acknowledging a painful past and the growth that had come from it. Walking back to my office afterward, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected. The Montgomerys had called me worthless trash at their dinner table, but in the end, they had been forced to recognize my value. Not because I had demanded it, but because I had created it myself, undeniably and on my own terms. 6 months later, I stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., accepting a National Innovation Award for our educational platform. The audience included policymakers, philanthropists, and education leaders from across the country. As I looked out at their faces, I spotted Richard and Eleanor Montgomery seated near the back, not as family or friends, but as business partners and reluctant admirers. "This platform was born from a simple belief," I said into the microphone, "that everyone deserves access to opportunity, regardless of their background or circumstances. That worth isn't determined by wealth or family name, but by character and contribution." From the podium, I could see Eleanor lean over to whisper something to Richard. He nodded slightly, his expression thoughtful. "When I was 14, aging out of my third foster home, a teacher told me something I've never forgotten." I continued. "She said, 'Your circumstances don't define your potential. Your response to them does. Today I stand before you as living proof of that truth. The applause was thunderous as I concluded my speech. As I left the stage, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Proud of you, sis. You showed them who you really are." And that was the final revelation. The most powerful response to being called worthless wasn't proving others wrong. It was proving yourself right. Building something meaningful. Creating value where others saw none. 2 years after that fateful dinner, I no longer defined myself in relation to the Montgomerys or their judgment. I had built my own table, one where worth wasn't inherited or bestowed, but recognized as inherent in every person. One where even those who once dismissed me had eventually sought a seat. As I left the award ceremony, a young woman approached me hesitantly. "Ms. Chen, I'm sorry to bother you, but I had to say thank you. I'm using your platform in my community center in South Boston. It's changing lives." "What's your name?" I asked. "Maria. I work with kids in foster care." I smiled, feeling the full circle moment. "Tell me more about your work, Maria. I'd love to hear about the impact you're seeing." As we talked, I caught sight of the Montgomerys exiting through a side door. Eleanor glanced back, meeting my eyes briefly across the crowded room. She nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement before disappearing into the night. I turned my attention back to Maria, to the future, to the work that mattered. The Montgomerys had called me worthless trash at their dinner table, but their words had long since lost their power to wound. In their place was something far stronger, the unshakable knowledge of my own worth, defined not by their assessment, but by the value I had created in the world. And in the end, that was the most powerful response of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.